Welcome back to Third Phase of Moon. Blake Cousins here. We got a special report for you today. I'm so pleased to announce that we have military aerospace historian Michael Schratt, who's joined the team, and he's about to share with us incredible insight, information from records that are over 100 years old to present day. He has obtained over 50,000 documents in regards to UFO sightings, the phenomenon, and we're going to be sharing it right now on Third Phase of Moon and our sister channel, Third Phase UFO Reports. So this is exciting to have Michael Schratt on board the Third Phase Moon team, sharing the incredible evidence that he's obtained over the years. Let's just start it off, and Michael's going to introduce himself and what his goal is.
Well, folks, military aerospace historian Michael Schratt with you today. Thanks for joining me today. I've reached a point in my life where I felt I had two choices here. Number one, I could just let this information pass away and be locked in a dark and dusty vault, never to be seen again, never to see the light of day. Or option B is to make it available to the general public. So that's what I've decided to do here, folks. I've decided to go ahead and make this information available, and anyone who's followed my research knows that I always provide references of where I get this material. I also provide a full color resolution, full color rendering of what these craft look like, so you don't have to imagine it. Now, these are all per eyewitness cases, and always want to follow up with some kind of an illustration just to get an idea across here. Now, today, I want to talk about the Otto Binder reports, and I've prepared a really quick slide here as kind of a historical background. Otto Binder was a prolific American author, born August 26, 1911. He died October 13, 1974. Starting in 1960, he published a daily newspaper feature titled Our Space Age, which featured things about satellites, rockets, and space exploration. By 1965, the whole thing changed. It was completely devoted to UFO cases. Now, these cases were sent to him from all around the world, and they'd be published in this newspaper column. This went from 1965 to 1969. The reports included a brief historical description of the sighting and a colorized sketch drawn by an artist named Carl Pfeiffer from 1910 to 1980. So he passed away in 1980. And where I got this information, this is stored at the Clarksburg Library, which is part of the Gray Barker collection. That's where these cases originate from. Just want to document my sources. Now, the color renderings were done by my artist, who's Tom Bogan. So if I fast forward here, this is a photograph of the man in question. This is Otto Binder, the prolific author. And then I've also included a photograph, a grainy photograph of the artist. This is Carl here in somewhat of a grainy photograph.
So Michael Schratt has indeed a massive amount of information. It's going to take some time, months, maybe years to get the word out in regards to his information that he's obtained. But let's start it off with his first case that goes back over 100 years. Michael?
I'm going to jump right into the first case. Now, what I'm going to provide for you first is the original sketch where we derive the color rendering from. So October 12th, 1796, on Columbus Day, over 170 years ago, Canadian observers reported an astonishing fleet of airships, UFOs, with portholes visible occupants, sailing over the Bay of Fundy from the Pacific Stars and Stripes, courtesy K. Larson. Interesting, they use the terminology fleet here, and I'm going to proceed on to the full color rendering, which you can see here. A couple points I want to bring out here. Number one, since this is 1796, this predates by at least 100 years the 1897 mystery airship wave. It predates that. It also predates the Foo Fighters of World War II, so that it predates. It also predates the June 24th, 1947 Kenneth Arnold sighting as well. Now, they use the term fleet, so that indicates that whatever these craft were, which were piloted here, they were under intelligent control. No doubt about it, because it said nothing about these things running into each other. Also, we should keep in mind that this is not, an unprecedented event. There is a historical legacy for these quote-unquote fleets flying over cities or other towns and locations. If we fast forward all the way to March 16th to March 18th, 1950, we had what's called the Farmington Armada, where we have nothing less than an invasion, you could call. This is vetted out by David Marler, who's the premier researcher on triangular UFOs. He had really done a tremendous amount of research on this Farmington Armada, where hundreds of UFOs overflew Farmington, and the whole town saw this. So this is not strictly an unprecedented event.
Now let's take it to Doc Skinner. Doc, what's your thoughts on this incredible case file?
I'd say it's a very intriguing case file that Michael Schratt has shared with us. In this case, the one of the fleet sighting by many people over Canada above the Bay of Funding on October 12, 1796. Over 170 years before all the other mainstream reports that we know of in our history, ufology. I've never heard of this one. And the fact it happened so long ago, before flying saucers were labeled, and all the big sightings that we know of in history, there was this one that was even further back, and it's compelling. It's a little interesting that these craft look like eggs. Some may say Tic Tacs, but to me they look like eggs with a portal window. And of course, these beings were seen in these craft, and they were, as I said, sailing like a fleet through the sky and were under some kind of control. As I've been doing this job, I've been seeing a large variety of spacecraft. So my question tonight is this eggshell craft or Tic Tac craft, is this coming from one specific species and this is their type of transportation, or is this just another model of spacecraft that our alien friends use to buzz the skies? It's very, very intriguing, but it does. It looks to me like a fleet of flying eggs. Maybe, did Mork and Mindy, did that show have, were they trying to tell us something? Who knows, but it's an awesome piece of history that many of us are unaware of. And I'm so glad that we get to find them and bring them to light. So Michael Schratt, good job. Great job.
All right, so we've seen the first incredible case as Michael Schratt has obtained the information and sharing it with Third Phase of Moon. Now let's move along to the second case.
November 13th, 1833. A crowd on both the American and Canadian sides saw a peculiar square-shaped UFO hover over Niagara Falls for an hour, after which it sped away toward the ocean. I think it's just so interesting. Okay, so number one, it's in the vicinity of water, right? So this could be a USO case. So we've got UFOs, we've got USOs, which are unidentified submerged objects. And what I want to bring out here is that when the Condon Committee report was delivered in 1969, they failed to mention even one USO case, not even one. So according to Jacques Vallée, they missed out on 51% of the entire phenomena. They just completely missed it in the report. I also want to bring out that this cube-shaped device, whatever it was, it showed no visible means of propulsion. It had no wings, no engine, no flight control, nothing. So wouldn't that be interesting if we could recover one of these and reverse engineer the technology and maybe figure out what the propulsion system is? That's something we should consider. So this is November 13th, 1833. Who's building these, ladies and gentlemen? 1833. We'll move ahead to the full color rendering here. You can see we've done a complete full color rendering. This is what it may have looked like. just a traumatically interesting case. Again, who's building these things in 1833? This is before the Wright brothers, before Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, December 17th, 1903, long before the Wright brothers.
Dark Hour Paranormal, what's your thoughts on this incredible case?
Now, I love retro sightings, especially when their nature is something so anomalous as what we have in this case. Now, the report states that there was a square-shaped, unidentified craft witnessed over Niagara Falls in 1833. Michael mentions it sped away towards the ocean at one point, and we've often speculated that many of these unidentified objects may take residence near our ocean floors. It's just an interesting facet about this sighting that can't go unnoticed. This is also an especially strong case, as it was witnessed by multiple individuals, and of course in this case in particular, by 2 different countries simultaneously. Now, a metapropulsion craft without any traditional apparatus to allow it to fly may not need bother with aerodynamics in the way that we are familiar. But why are there so many different shapes, some seemingly more aerodynamic than others, such as the sports model or the TR-3B? Again, it seems like an anomaly within an anomaly that certainly needs an answer. Now remember, this was back in 1833, when none of the well-known black projects had taken place, and most people were consumed with the troubled relationships they held with Native Americans. I don't think many were focused on high technology or back engineering what little they may have had, if they had any recovered debris at all. The location of this sighting is also very curious. Why Niagara Falls? Maybe because the waterfalls give off an excessive amount of negative ions. I mean, we know negative ions to be positive for human health, and if the reports of extraterrestrial craft are indeed organic, well, maybe they have some positive effects from negative ions as well. Just a thought, but that being said, we do witness many of these sightings over bodies of water, and in this case, that water is certainly moving. So why are they there? Fascinating sighting, and one from our history that will not be forgotten.
Absolutely. Now, this is interesting that we have this information. A lot of it has never been seen before until now. Some of these stories are so obscure, but we're bringing light to it. Even now more than ever, I can say this, that some of these newspaper clippings and the reports with now Third Phase of Moon's subscription base, we're getting the word out more than ever than even the time of the newspaper publications. Now, let's take it out to this third incredible sighting case file. Michael, what do you got?
All right, we'll move on to our next case here. 1882, near Ascension Isle, a British steamer came upon a gigantic UFO floating in the ocean at least 800 feet long, or nearly as big as the Queen Elizabeth, which slowly sank beneath the waves and vanished from sight. This is in 1882, okay? So, again, a couple things we should talk about here. This is definitely a USO case, so it's an unidentified submerged object. We're talking about something that was approximately 800 feet across. So now we're in the category, ladies and gentlemen, where we're pushing the boundaries of what's physically possible, man-made technology. Back in 1882, we're really pushing the edge of the boundary of what's possible here, what's even feasible. And if anyone doubts the USO cases are real, all I would do is I would recommend the book by Ivan T. Sanderson called Invisible Residents, where he tracks and documents hundreds, and we'll move ahead to the full color rendering here, hundreds of these USO encounters from the U.S. Navy. We've got cases from these Japanese fishing trawlers where they would be fishing and then something would be caught in the net, ladies and gentlemen, and they would pull this net up on the stern of the craft, and what they have snagged in their net is like a 50-foot diameter USO. This happened multiple times, and it's all within this book by Ivan T. Sanderson called Invisible Residents. So that's this case in 1882.
So now let's take it out to another member who's going over this incredible case file. Dr. J, what's your thoughts on this incredible historical event?
So now we have a case which involves history and USO. 1882. We're talking more than half a century before we had submarines or anything of the like, U-boats. We have a British steamship with their sailors on it saw approximately an 800-foot object that was hovering just above the ocean before it started sinking very, very slowly. And mind you, something that big, like for instance, the Titanic, which was built almost 30 years later. I think the construction began in 1911 or so. It was about 3 years. The point being, though, is those were the giant ships of the time. 800 foot is massive. And especially if the illustration is correct, where it is not looking like a ship, where it's not a cigar-shaped object. It looks to be more of a blob of some sort. This is a very, very interesting case, and unfortunately with history, we can't interview witnesses because they're dead. We all have an expiration date. Another thing is we don't have the technology to go back and see cameras or even photographs at the time. Yes, there were cameras, there were still cameras, but not video cameras that were everywhere on this planet, and definitely not satellites, at least that we know of. But here you have a case where you have sailors who are credible when it comes to maritime. Sailors don't mess around because otherwise they would not be allowed to be working on the ships. And of course, if you're a passenger that's on a passenger ship, you're going to pay top dollar if you're going to, say, go from the United Kingdom to the North Americas. Either way, it's a very, very bizarre case, and I gotta thank Michael Schratt for covering this one, because I love when people keep track of our history, and I don't like when people say UFOs only came from the craze of the movies in the 50s, when actually I've heard it's the other way around. If people weren't seeing things in the space, in the skies, or in the oceans before then, there would be no movies being made by them.
Now let's get to the fourth case file presented by Michael Schratt. Michael, go ahead.
July 1868. Villagers in Campeche, Chile were frightened by a giant armor-plated machine covered with steel scales whose twin searchlight eyes stabbed down brilliantly. I love the wording on this. Okay, again, this is 1868. This is before the Wright brothers flew. Now, this is interesting because a similar thing happened during the 1897 mystery airship wave, where we had these similar flying vehicles. They almost looked like birds that had these beaming spotlights that came down. That was absolutely reported in the 1897 mystery airship wave. We'll move forward to the full color rendering here. You can see what Tom Bogan's done for us. So again, this is predating the Wright brothers. We've got these steel scales that they reported. Now, if that's true, we could be looking at something that weighed approximately, between 50 to 100 tons. That completely takes lighter than airship vehicles out of the question. We're dealing with another level of technology here. If in fact this was a steel-plated bird, some type of a steel-plated flying machine, we're no longer in the realm of lighter than air vehicles. This is some other type of propulsion system that someone has perfected as early as 1868.
This is an incredible sighting. It's hard to believe that some of these encounters appeared before the Wright brothers even invented the first airplane. And some of these shapes in the sky resembles aircraft, pretty much commercial to this day. How is this possible? Let's take it out to Rich Giordano from Goof On. Rich, what's your thoughts on this historical case?
So Michael Schratt, new member to Third Phase of Moon, new panelist, has brought some interesting historical and unbelievable UFO reports from the 1700s, 1800s, and so on. And these are sightings that we'll never hear about from mainstream media. They've just fallen to the wayside into the history of our genre. So the one thing I wanted to talk about was this winged craft that had scales on it, and people reporting that this thing was huge, shot down 2 beams, real direct. sounds like to me like it was like a TR-3B type of craft. It's pretty amazing what they saw back then, because that was before the Wright brothers. I believe it was 1867 or something like that. It was an unbelievable report where people kept seeing this winged craft that had scales on it. And I guess they estimated it to weigh over 150 tons, and something that is flying around in that time didn't exist. It barely existed on the ground. So we've got a report of something that looks and sounds like it could be some sort of bird type looking UFO. And what do you say to that? It's like, you know, it's a report from the 1800s. So, you know, you take it for what it is. And back then, they really weren't, you know, hiding things like this from the public. It was just airships and strange flying craft. So great report from Michael Schratt. We definitely love to see more from Michael, and I'm sure we will. So thanks for sharing this, and I'm glad I could share my opinion and thought on it. I don't know what it is. It sounds like these craft were around for thousands of years. We've seen them before in paintings, frescoes, and artwork, you know, from a couple thousand years ago. So it's pretty amazing that this report even exists. So thanks again, Michael Schratt and Third Phase of Moon. Talk to you guys later.
So this is just the beginning in regards to Michael Schratt's UFO case files. Again, he's had over 50,000 investigations that he's obtained through this library, and it's incredible that we're going to be sharing it with you exclusively on Third Phase UFO Report and Third Phase of Moon. So this is the time to go back to school, learn a little history, and know that we've been visited long before the major media or any other source in this field has reported in a long, long time. Everybody keep your eyes on the skies and stay tuned for more updates from Michael Schratt, including more UFO videos just into Third Phase of Moon. Blake Cousins. Keep your eyes on the skies, everybody. Be safe. We'll see you next time.